Dr. Cortez is our Managing Director of People and Organizational Strategy for Nonprofit HR. He is an industrial, organizational, and business psychologist with extensive experience in the nonprofit sector. In his role, he provides strategic and operational leadership to people and our organizational strategy. Without further ado, I'd like to offer the stage to Dr. Antonio Cortez.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some space with you all this morning. And I will be sharing a few slides here to cover today's topic around authentic leadership. I just have a few things to share up on the screen today, but I did want to center us on some expectations for what I will cover as part of today's brief presentation on authentic leadership. So as with any concept or topic or model, I think it's important for us to ground on, well, what is authentic leadership, and define that a little bit, talk about what the characteristics of an authentic leader are. And then we'll explore a little bit about what authentic leadership is in practice, how it shows up, how we might observe it or engage in it, and also talk about what it's not. There's often limits to what an effective authentic leader, how they might show up, and the things that they may or may not do, and how they might taper their behaviors and actions. So definitely want to explore those kind of the range of what fits into that sweet spot of ideal authentic leadership versus potentially being too authentic of a leader and leaning too much into a certain style or kind of set of behaviors, if you will. And then we'll wrap our content today with some ideas on how to become more authentic in your leadership style, and to think about ways that you can further enhance your skill set and other things that can contribute to ultimately showing up on a day-to-day basis as an authentic leader. Following the close of the presentation, we'll definitely have a few minutes for Q&A, so we can ask whatever questions you like about the presentation, or even share thoughts around the topic of authentic leadership. We'd welcome some active dialogue at the end here, but that'll be our plan for our 10 minutes together. And with that, I want to jump right in. And, there's definitely a different definition of authentic leadership depending upon the specific source that you're referencing or asking. But for the most part, they do center around some very common topics and characteristics. And so according to HubSpot, authentic leadership is a management style in which leaders value sincerity and behave with integrity. And they do this through their genuine actions, and they're actually able to inspire loyalty and trust within their colleagues and staff by creating an environment that leads to higher job satisfaction. And so authentic leadership in a nutshell is really about folks showing up on a day-to-day basis in a way that is true to themselves, that allows them to lean into their authentic selves at work, and providing leadership and guidance to their team members and colleagues in a way that aligns with their normal personality. So they're not faking it, is another way to think about it. And so common authentic leadership characteristics for folks that are displaying authentic leadership, you will see a higher level or incidence of things like humility, where they might, take ownership for things that are they're responsible for, even when they don't go well. They may also downplay some of their accomplishments in some instances, but they're not looking for, the high levels of recognition. They're not seeking center stage in most cases. They're very humble folks in terms of how they operate in their leadership style. The other thing that shows up consistently with authentic leaders is a level of integrity. You can count on these individuals very consistently to show up in the same way in most different spaces. You can count on them to be very consistent in how they interact and provide feedback to their colleagues. And you know that if they agree to do something, they often follow through and meet the set timelines or objectives that they had agreed to. And if they don't, they're more often than not either going to inform you along the way if they feel like they're going to miss those targets, or if they are kind of, it's brought to their attention, they're often going to accept that responsibility as part of their operating kind of perspective on what integrity is. Additionally, authentic leaders also display empathy at a higher level than most folks. And so they have a greater ability to understand their team members' perspectives and point of view, some of the barriers that the team members might be experiencing. And so if you've ever thought about a time at work where you're having a rough day and maybe a manager or colleague came over and they recognized that. They saw what your energy was. They saw that it wasn't a normal thing that was happening in today's world or today's moment in time. And they recognized it, called it out, and tried to give you some opportunity to engage in dialogue or just offered some support in some way. So empathy is a key factor of authentic leadership. There's also discipline, which is a fourth item that often shows up. And this is where folks, again, around that idea of consistency and how a manager or a leader will come to the table and have this kind of dependency on being able to bring the same things consistently over time. And you will very rarely see them operating outside of that norm. So if someone as an authentic leader leads into a specific type of communication style, they're going to leverage that to their benefit most of the time. Also, if a manager is really adept at matching energy in a room, then they're going to consistently do that in terms of being disciplined and showing up, again, very consistently in the same way over and over again over time. A fifth item that authentic leaders, in terms of characteristics, display is transparency. So authentic leaders are often more communicative around how decisions are made. They are often forthcoming with details when they're asked about why something was implemented or how something came to be in terms of a process or a system. Authentic leaders are often very forthcoming with that information, and it's something that contributes to them being authentic, right? They don't have to hide that they made a decision on something and maybe it was favorable for some folks and not for others. They're going to also be holding themselves accountable and being transparent as to why that decision may have been made in that way and some of the rationale that contributed to that decision making. So you rarely will have questions around why an authentic leader operates in the way they do or why decisions are made in that manner. Authentic leaders also have a high level of self-awareness. They often understand their own emotional state. They also understand how they're showing up in different spaces. So they're more able to manage whether how they dress in a specific space, how they communicate, their eye contact, the type of jokes they might use in different settings. So they have very high self-awareness on how people are perceiving them and also managing that. And then lastly, authentic leaders often have a high commitment to personal development, meaning that they're always looking to enhance their skills, looking for ways to better be more effective in how they lead their teams and how they collaborate with their colleagues. So that personal development often shows up consistently over time with authentic leaders because they are always looking for how to be more effective while including all of the things that make them strong leaders in the first place and pushing that skill set as far out as possible in whatever directions they feel would be useful or beneficial to their teams and to the organization and to their careers as well. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of understanding what authentic leadership is. Also understanding what authentic leadership isn't is an important thing to consider as we get to the second part of our presentation today, in that while on the surface, authentic leadership might sound or feel like someone that leans explicitly into their strengths or their preferences on a regular basis, sometimes they will also, when we go back to that concept of self-awareness, authentic leaders are also really good at managing how far into their authentic selves they can lean into in various spaces. So for example, one of my authentic character traits is that I like to use humor in most of my leadership interactions, whether it be with senior management, CEOs of large nonprofits, or even people that I supervise. And so there's almost always a joke to be kind of sewn into some conversation. I like to laugh. However, being highly self-aware means I also have to regulate when a joke is appropriate versus not. So I may, in a moment, choose to say, okay, I'm going to say something that I believe might land well, might be funny. I may taper the content of a joke. I may taper the delivery of a joke, but I may also be thinking about how I can maintain my authenticity while still reading the room and recognize how I show up in the space. And so authentic leadership does not necessarily mean you're showing all of your cards. You are your 100% personal self in every space. It's more so on how much of yourself can you bring to the table to introduce people to your style and your processes without overstepping the ability to be effective in that space too. So recognizing that authentic leadership is also a balance of being true to yourself, but reading the room at the same time. So with that in mind, well, how do you become more of an authentic leader? And what I would love to leave you all with was a couple of three things, high level, that I have found to be extremely helpful for building authentic leadership as a style and as a mode of operation. And the first is probably not surprising, but developing your emotional intelligence and continuing to enhance it is one of those key characteristics of highly effective, authentic leaders. So as I mentioned about what an authentic leader is and isn't, having to manage your own emotional state and recognizing how you're influencing and impacting those folks that you're interacting with requires a high level of emotional intelligence. And this is a skill that can be developed. So working on that aspect of your traits and skills is highly helpful to being more authentic in an effective way. Secondly, practicing the art and science of transparency. There's no hard and fast rule for the most part around how transparent someone could or should be to be authentic, but also effective. But I've found personally that there's the desire to be transparent, to be effective as an authentic leader, but then there's also instances where too much information is not helpful. And that's where the art and comes into play on top of science. So I may have information about how a decision was made, but I don't necessarily need to share every specific detail that contributed to a decision. Maybe just a high level bullet points, and that would be sufficient. Or maybe just in some cases, the fact that a decision was made and we considered different viewpoints along the way, communicating different stakeholder groups that we talk to and add it to our process. That might be sufficient. So there's some art and science and transparency, and practicing that and becoming more comfortable is definitely key. And then the last thing I will share is that challenging yourself to acknowledge openly when you don't have the answers, but to constantly have a process and ability and desire to seek to find the answers. So I will tell you as a leader myself, I don't always have all the answers, but my job at the end of the day is to make sure that an answer is found and put forth. And so my job is to bridge that gap when it comes to authentic leadership. And so I will acknowledge when I don't have an answer, but I will commit to making sure that I figure it out or come back with one after conferring with other stakeholder groups. So hopefully this all was helpful to you as you think about your own leadership style and to become a more authentic leader. And I would welcome questions, thoughts, comments at this time from the audience, and appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Antonio. I would like to open the floor for any questions. Again, thank you, Dr. Cortez.
Thanks, Antonio. That was great. I loved all your points and made some notes. I did have one question on your first list of what makes up authentic leadership. Your last bullet, I think you had 6 or something like that, was about commitment to personal development. Can you say a little bit more of how that is a part of authentic leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. So authentic leadership, I believe, is a spectrum of capability, right? So I may be more authentic in one space versus another, but being able to be dynamic in changing your spaces means that you have to also be able to operate effectively in different communication styles. As one example, so communication, I may be hyper effective in verbal communication as an example, but that may not always be my primary mode of being able to connect with people. So I may also have to enhance my written skill in terms of communication as well. And so to be highly effective across multiple spaces and still leaning into your authentic self, I found that requires you to hone your skill sets in a lot of different ways. And so, for folks that maybe are really good in one thing, but okay in another, if they start to become more well-rounded, they're able to become their authentic selves more so in each of those different spaces when they have a better command of, say, a communication style, right? So if I'm highly effective at talking and communicating verbally, but I'm not as great a writer, I can't necessarily be 100% authentic when I'm writing because I'm always going to be conscious of my lesser skill in that area, or or being more adept in another area. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of thinking about skill development. It's really about maximizing your ability in different environments and being able to leverage, whether it be communication style or empathy or some of the other things, as effectively as possible in different environments.
Great. Thanks. That ties it back to authenticity. It's helpful to me. Thank you.
I have a question, and do you find that people who are inauthentic leaders, do they want to develop into authentic leaders? Is there that curiosity to want to be authentic?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's another good. My answer would be it depends, right? Because there's folks that are on different range of a spectrum of preference on their leadership style. But I would say that there are definitely people that I won't say that they don't want to be authentic leaders. I think that there's certain folks that believe that leadership is something else, other than showing up and saying, I don't know what the answer is to that. I've encountered some leaders who have been very successful in their careers, but they have done so while coming to the table with answers every time there's a problem. They've been successful by being very decisive and moving forward quickly and being quick to respond, even if they don't have the optimal solution to bring forth. They just found that those different strategies and tactics have been effective for them in their past. So I think it kind of really is more a relationship of what folks feel is going to be most productive and useful in a space in terms of leadership. And so in some cases, they may show up as someone feel like maybe they don't need to be authentic because there's a different strategy to take. Whereas others, they maybe want to be more authentic, but don't feel like they have the agency to do so, maybe because of an organizational culture or different things, or they've just never seen someone model it effectively. So I think there's a lot of different answers in terms of like the actual situation that folks are seeing or experiencing. But I would say there's opportunity on the table for the most part, and we just need to be able to, if we want to foster authentic leadership as another direction, we have to start to create an environment where that's accepted, welcomed, and supported.
Thank you. And I just have one really quick question. I found myself tripping over your name just then. How do you like to be called? Dr. Cortez, Dr. Antonio?
Yeah, I go by T-Bone, so that works. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. See, there you go. I'm authentic leadership in motion right here.
Yeah.
I don't really have a preference for, folks kind of call me whatever they feel is most comfortable, but Dr. C, I know, is Denisha's go-to. Antonio is also cool. I'm not big on titles, but if you like to use titles, whatever feels as comfortable would be great on my side.
Okay. I'm sorry that I fumbled over your name. I realized I don't know what he likes to be called.
You're good. You're good. I take as long as you don't call me Anthony. If you avoid that, we're good.
Thank you so much again for your wonderful presentation. And we are going to move on to our next presenter. And calling to the stage, Alicia Shoshinsky, who is our Chief People and Culture Officer for Nonprofit HR. As Chief People and Culture Officer at Nonprofit HR, Alicia leads the development and execution of the firm's talent management strategy. She partners with other leaders to implement programs and policies that drive employee engagement, retention, and development. Alicia enjoys helping to bridge relationships with employees and managers and fostering a values-led culture. Without further ado, I turn the stage over to you, Alicia.
So thank you, Atokatha, and it's great to be here with all of you today. I'm excited to talk about the changing expectations for employees in terms of growth and development, and then also talking about how nonprofits can meet that, but also benefit from that, a strategy around that as well. So I want to start, and I want to take you back. I want you to just think back in time to your first job when you were out of school. So for some of you, that wasn't that long ago. For others of us, that was quite a while ago. And I'm sharing with you, I'm going to tell you about my first job. That's not me in the picture, but probably could have been because computers were about that big back in the day. And so my first job was a human resources assistant. I worked for a small government contractor. That was my first job out of college. I majored in business and I had a focus on human resources and really thought I might be interested in the human resources field. So I took this role to gain some experience and certainly to learn and grow. And so we know that learning and growth and development is important to most employees, but that has certainly evolved as our workplaces have evolved, our workforce has evolved. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We also know that it's important for nonprofits. In order to achieve your mission, you really do need to recognize and have an intentional strategy around employee growth in order to retain and engage employees. But also, as I said, to achieve your mission, you really need to have a really agile workforce. So I challenge you during this discussion to really think about whether your nonprofit has an intentional strategy for doing so. And we'll talk about some of the steps to do that. So I mentioned the workforce is changing, and we know that. And right now, these are the generations we have in the workforce: our baby boomers, our Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, which provides great diversity of thought. But also we know there are generalizations about different preferences for each group. We know that Gen Z and millennials currently make up more than half of our workforce, and that number just keeps growing. Another report is projecting by 2030 that Gen Z will make up at least 30% of the workforce. So we focus a lot on what each of these groups is interested in. And one study showed that, for instance, 87% of millennials said that job development was the most important thing to them. So growth and development is really a key thing with these generations. I know all value learning and continuous learning, but these generations have a specific interest in that. But as I said, everybody approaches this differently. And so, all of us have our own learning styles and preferences. And if you generalize by group, some of these have different styles and preferences based on their own experiences. So as you're thinking on behalf of your nonprofit of what you need to be mindful of in order to align your programs and your strategies with employee expectations, you want to think of a number of things. And so to start with, we know that career growth is important. And most of us, are familiar with the old career ladder, the image of the ladder, and you're going up the ladder to be able to succeed within your organization or within your profession. But now we also tend to use terms like a career lattice, where employees can work across organizations, different roles, have different opportunities. Also a career portfolio, where you might do something over here, and then you might do something different over here. You might do something different outside of the organization. So you might be in the gig economy. There's lots of opportunities there. And so as you think of that career growth, a lot of organizations also have internal mobility plans. And some even have what they term as internal gig marketplaces. So it's an opportunity where they have projects and things for people to work on. They post them, you sign up for them, you get opportunities to do those things, and that you kind of have the autonomy to be able to do that and work across the organization. So those are some ways that organizations are responding to some of the different preferences. We also know that training and learning tools have really evolved. So, once upon a time, you had to bring in a trainer. We still do that, but bring in someone from the outside or have someone internally train a group of employees all in one room. Well, now with technology, we obviously have the ability to train on demand, train across the globe. You can train people at the same time. A lot of micro learning where employees might prefer to just learn in little bursts and do a little bit at a time. Learning management systems are becoming much more customized. We know that millennials and Gen Z are digital natives and, like more interactive and less passive learning. Employees today also expect for their learning to be more personalized and customized and tailored to their career path. So some systems can also you put in your career goals and it will say, this is the training you should take. This is what you should do. And so it can really help you. And with AI, that's only going to get even better. And then finally, some training allows for, or some people use gamification, such as virtual reality tools and such. So you can really get in and really have a very interactive experience as you're learning. So all of those tools are important to keep in mind and really, evolve your strategy around those. And the other things that are important are things like cross-training and shadowing, taking advantage and leveraging the expertise and experience of some of your employees to be able to train others. Mentoring is also very valued. A lot of organizations have the opportunity to do cross-generational mentoring. And then managers should really be good about career coaching. So being very proactive, talking with your employees about how to coach them within their career and what they should be doing. And then professional development support. A lot of organizations offer tuition assistance, but there's also a lot of certifications that some fields, such as healthcare, we know requires a lot of certifications. Organizations should be mindful of helping employees to have access to things such as that as well. So we've talked about all of that and how that helps to engage and retain your employees. So that's kind of on the side of the employee, what you need to do. But what is your nonprofit doing to support that learning culture? And then how can that strategy help your organization? So you want to make the case for how this can benefit your organization. And so some of the key things to be mindful of is right now we know we're in the midst of a labor shortage. We talked about the different demographics, and we know that baby boomers are retiring, birth rates are lower. Many people during the pandemic shifted how they work. They might be working outside in the gig economy and not in the full-time workforce anymore. Many organizations are already feeling this pull and push in that we saw that there's a study that showed 74% of nonprofits reported vacancies in their program and delivery service delivery areas. And that can have a huge impact on them being able to deliver on their mission. Turnover, we know, can also really impact and disrupt an organization. So when employees leave, you lose that knowledge. If you haven't done succession planning, you might not be ready to see who's going to take the place and do the work that they're doing. And then I would say one of the biggest things to be mindful of is agility. You want your organization to be as agile as possible because we know there's such a rapid pace of change in our world. Organizations are having to shift and pivot. We all certainly saw that during the pandemic where nonprofits had to rethink how they did the work. They probably had to do different work because services were demanded differently. They might have not had enough people, so they might have had to do them with different people or less people. So being very agile is key to your organization. And so having the skills to help with that agility is really important. Organizations also have a lot of untapped talent. We know that we hire people for certain skills, but sometimes we don't know about all the other experience or abilities that they have. And we need to find ways to tap into that, whether it's through upskilling or other ways. The other thing that's really key to agility is making sure you have employees who have those essential skills, which are sometimes termed as soft skills. But essential skills is the more preferred term today because those really are key. Things like communication skills, emotional intelligence, as Antonio mentioned, curiosity, having a learning mindset, being able to solve problems. All of those things are really helpful in building an agile workforce, along with, of course, being tech savvy and AI adoption and being open to that as well. So you don't always have to hire employees for skills that you need when your priorities change, but you can certainly upskill and reskill and also identify skills that are existing that you might not have used before. So as we flash back to that first job we all thought about earlier, you think back about how much maybe you learned and could you have benefited from a more intentional development strategy? I know, what I learned in my company, I don't know that it was necessarily an intentional strategy. I did feel like I learned and grew, but I think about what if they had a more intentional strategy, how different that experience might have been, and I may have stayed longer as well. So again, back to that initial question of, is your nonprofit prioritizing learning and development as part of your overall strategy? And are you being very intentional? So I hope you'll think about that as you go away. And I want to leave you with some tips about how you can do that within your organization. So just to wrap up, number one is make the case for learning and development within your organization and explain the impact and talk about all the things I mentioned. And then develop your learning and development strategy and make sure that's anchored in your business strategy, such as your mission, your vision, your values, and do an environmental scan and really look at what are the drivers toward that strategy. And then as you complete that and you come up with what are the skills that you need, inventory your existing skills, and then you'll be able to identify skills gaps and understand where you need to develop staff further. And then the next thing is developing career paths. So we talked about that before, how employees want to know and be transparent about how they can grow. So develop those around your competencies and then be very transparent about that. Have your managers coach employees on how they move throughout the organization. And then determine your learning activities and pathways. You might need to shift some of the things you have, but you want to be able to meet employees where they're at and use tools and pathways that resonate with them. And then finally, you want to make sure you're being agile because you know this plan will need to be adjusted as things change. So you want to be ready for that. So all of these steps should really help prepare your nonprofit to both better engage and retain your staff as you're meeting their needs for learning and development, but then also helping your nonprofit be the agile organization that you would like it to be able to meet your mission and pivot as things change. So I hope this helps you make a successful learning and development strategy. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Alicia, for your presentation. I'd like to open it up. I think we have time for one question so that we can keep moving. Anybody have any questions for Alicia?
I just have one question, Alicia, and I apologize if you touched on this and I missed it. Is it better for employees to drive their own learning and development and say, I want to do this, I want to go here or there? Or is it better if a manager handpicks someone and says, hey, I see this in you, I'd like you to do this program or follow this track? What would you recommend for nonprofits or really any organization?
Yeah, Stephanie, that's a great question. And I don't think I did touch on that, but I think it's a very important point. Obviously, you want to keep equity in mind as you're developing your strategy and making sure everybody has the same opportunity for advancement. But I think it's a mutual responsibility. It's not really, we talked about, employees being career coaches, but you shouldn't be telling somebody what they should be doing. You need to have those career coaching conversations and hear what the employee is interested in and what direction they want to go. And then you can help as a manager being supportive and saying, okay, if this is what you'd like to do, here are some options, here are some tools for you. But the employee also has to take it upon themselves to seek out learning and taking the time to invest in doing that. So it definitely is a mutual relationship thing. So it's a great question. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you so much, Alicia, and for your presentation. We've heard from Dr. Cortez. We've heard from Alicia. And now we are going to transition to our next presenter. Next up, we have Denisha Martin, team leader and senior consultant for search for our Impact Search Advisors practice. Denisha is a trusted advisor for the firm's retained search engagement. She conducts interviews with senior and C-level professionals and evaluates qualifications and alignment with the client organization's needs. Gifted in assessing talent, adept in relationship building, and known for her professionalism and creative strategic approach, Denisha designs and manages the search process and ensures the successful experience of both clients and candidates. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Denisha.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome and introduction, Tokatha. It really is a pleasure to be here with all of you this afternoon. I would love to just kind of set the stage a bit here. What we're going to talk about today is job hopping or career building, a generational perspective. So to set the stage, I want you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine that you are an HR professional who is tasked with filling XYZ role, one of the many vacancies in your organization. And you have a virtual digital stack of resumes to go through in your applicant tracking system of choice. And the first one you open shows tenure of 10 years in the current role and 7 years in the previous role and 11 years in the role before that. This is a seasoned professional who's been working for 3 decades. And the next resume that you open has the same amount of tenure, just about, maybe within 5 or 10 years, but that tenure is spread out over a dozen, maybe even a dozen and a half different opportunities. And I want you to think about in your mind which of those profiles is more valuable to your organization. Now open your eyes. So again, I just want you to hold that imaginary hypothetical scenario in your mind, because this is a shifting landscape, as my colleague Alicia just recently pointed out, when it comes to a generational perspective of the workforce and the diversity therein, and what those implications are depending on the role in which you sit as a candidate, as a hiring manager, as an HR professional. So we're going to dive into this discussion. And in doing so, we're going to look at a couple of things regarding these generational differences. So it may be helpful for us to take a quick look at what that generational divide, if you will, looks like on a pie chart. So you can see here that baby boomers, who in this year of 2024 make up about 25% of the workforce, with then Gen X, nice little shout out there, and millennials making up right over 30% of the workforce. And then you have Generation Z, who at this time are in their young to mid 20s in the workforce, making up about 7% of the workforce. Now, what is interesting about that is to think about how this translates to average tenure in position. And so this chart will show you that for baby boomers, on average, they are spending about 8 years in a role, or in a, not in a role, sorry, in a, with an employer. Generation X is spending an average of 5. Millennials, an average of 3, and our beloved Gen Z, an average of 1.5. So again, completely different kind of tenure profile, if you will. And it is very interesting to see the downward trajectory that can be attributed to numerous things. So that said, we should talk through a little bit of what these kind of overarching, and I will say can be generalizations, are generation by generation. So when you think about a baby boomer, on average, again, 8-year tenure in position, stability, loyalty to one company are often seen as the pinnacle of a baby boomer's career success. Gen X, also known as the latchkey generation, I certainly had a latchkey around my neck. I don't know if any of you all did, but their average tenure, again, being around 5 years. Yes, they value stability. However, definitely more open to change if the change aligns to their career goals. And just in a moment of transparency, I certainly started my career off on that very trajectory. I had a model in my mind of my grandparents as baby boomers and as my parents as elder Gen X. And I figured out that I'm supposed to get a job and stay in it. And after about 5 years, almost to the year, I decided to make a major career change. And after another 5+ years, did it again. And so I really, it almost made me laugh to see just how much I fit the bill. Now, our millennials, who can sometimes be labeled as job hoppers, but again, we might need to start shifting our perception of what that is. Their average tenure being about 3 years, they are prioritizing growth opportunities, work-life integration, company culture, and they're prioritizing that over a long-term commitment, because the commitment is to the development, to the growth. It's a much more dynamic approach. And I have to say, we have a lot to learn from millennial. And then Gen Z, although obviously they're just entering the workforce and are earlier in their career, the preliminary data is suggesting that rapid progression, flexibility, and absolutely must align to their values is what is driving this generation. So you might be thinking to yourself, why does this matter? It is very important because these are not just statistics, but it's a reflection of deeper generational values. And so what we want to start thinking about is, because the younger generation is going to only get larger and larger and larger, how do we who sit in these decision-making seats, whether as hiring managers or HR practitioners, how do we need to shift with this trend? So maybe it is time to start thinking about the younger generation's perspective as building a portfolio of experiences that make them more versatile and adaptable in fast-changing job markets as a value add versus as a detriment. And maybe we need to be thinking really strongly about how do we actually retain and engage these individuals. So 3 things to keep in mind if you are seated in a hiring manager or an HR seat: retention strategy, onboarding, and employer branding. These 3 elements will be tantamount, paramount, and any other superlative you can think of to make sure that you are on the right side of these shifts and these changes. So retention, be thinking about continuous learning opportunities and how to make those learning opportunities flexible and dynamic. Be thinking about clear paths for advancement and flexibility and work arrangements. COVID and its aftermath have completely changed the terrain when it comes to flexibility and work arrangements. Onboarding. With shorter expected tenures, onboarding becomes even more critical. So quick but thorough integration is the way to go. And it can help new hires really hit the ground running and contribute meaningfully and in a shorter time frame. Employer branding, have to brag on nonprofit HR for that, but companies have to position themselves as a dynamic and growth-oriented place where employees can expand their skills and progress in their careers, sometimes even in a shorter burst of time. Now, what does this mean if you are seated in the candidate seat? It means a few things. We should be thinking about how these trends are shifting and how they are approaching their careers. So be thinking about career portfolio as opposed to career ladder, skill development, and values alignment. So around career portfolio, again, be thinking about building those diverse portfolios, gaining a variety of experiences, and doing that across a variety of different roles in industry. It's almost like when you go to your favorite Las Vegas buffet and you can put together your perfect plate and you can sit there for 5 hours and have completely different palates and satisfy them. And that's how the younger generation is looking at their career, satisfying so many different passions and palettes that they have. Skill development. With every job change, there's an emphasis on acquiring those new skills. And as a candidate in the market, you can think, what is all in my toolbox, in my treasure chest that I can bring out, and what is it lacking that I wish to build in my tool set? And then values alignment. We mentioned that the younger workers are increasingly seeking employers whose values align to their own, and they are very likely to decline employer offers if they sense that their values cannot fully be lived out or will not be celebrated. I want you to go back to our hypothetical scenario, close your eyes again, look at those 2 different resume profiles, whether the older generation or the younger generation, and just start to allow your mind to shift in terms of what information are you really gathering by seeing those multiple changes of employers. Now open your eyes. So remember, what was once considered job hopping is being rebranded as strategic career building. Understanding these generational shifts is so crucial to both employers and employees alike, and together we can navigate this evolving landscape. What would I like to leave you with today? Flexibility, adaptability, alignment with personal values. These are becoming the cornerstones of a successful career, regardless of your length of tenure at any one organization. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Questions?
Thank you very much. Denisha, we have time for one question with Denisha before we move on.
I'll ask a question. How do you help some of the hiring managers that are struggling to see this transition maybe look at it differently?
I love that question, Jeannie. And it's a deeper answer than what we have time for. But what I will say is this is so important when it comes to the EDIJ training landscape, because oftentimes we're still reducing diversity and the parameters of diversity around race, gender identity. But generational perspective is going to be such a key generation, or rather diversity parameter, and that can be a focal point when a culture is shifting within an organization because of the different generations that exist within that company culture. And so I would say include that training, include those opportunities for hiring managers to view generational perspectives just as they would as racial perspectives or gender perspectives.
Thank you again, Denisha, for your presentation. And we are going to move on to our next presenter. Next up is our colleague, Jeannie Lloyd. Jeannie Lloyd is our senior consultant for outsourcing. She is an HR leader who supports clients from many backgrounds. She specializes in helping companies achieve an engaged and positive workforce that drives bottom line results, making them places people want to work. Jeannie has a genuine passion for seeing people succeed by finding win-win solutions and by using her talents for authenticity and empathy. Without further ado, I turn it over to you, Jeannie.
Thank you so much. I'm going to talk today about change management and how HR can really influence this process. This became a real passion of mine as I went through 4 CEOs in 5 years with an organization, and I saw the impact it had on its people. And so I want to talk about really 3 roles that HR can utilize in this process and some real actionable tricks that you can have in helping navigate organization. So really, it's about enabling this framework for people on the other side of this change management, thinking about how many different conversations do you have in a day? There's Slack, Teams, Zoom. You have lots and lots of conversation, and leadership happens one conversation at a time. And so it's thinking about how can I, as an HR person, coach, what difference can I make in each conversation that you have? There's some things happening. This is from Gartner research in 2016 versus currently. Planned enterprise changes were at 2 a year, and now the average is up to 10 a year. And so the amount of changes employees have to process at any given time is going up. At the same time, the employee's ability to support change in that same period of time from 2016 to now is going down. So for their support in 2016 was about 74% to now 38%. And so, why might that change be? It could be change fatigue, workloads. They've seen past changes fail. Or, you changed once and now you're changing again and it's changing again. And why did we change the last time for the next time? So they may not be really invested in this decision. And so the amount of changes are taking its toll. So what's happening, and the challenge is the amount of changes are going up at the amount that the buy-in is going down. And so that's the landscape that HR leaders are facing and where you have to try to do. So the first step in this is really laying the foundation and designing a change. And this is really that proverbial seat at the table. And we don't always get this spot. Usually they're calling us in after they've already done it. But when you get this opportunity, you are taking this people side of it. It's this orange circle here on your slide of this people side. They're looking at the financial side and the feasibility and the viability of part of it, but how do you partner with your organization for this people piece of it? Assess that. How do you know that it's a human-centered design and that the people are part of it? Here are some things that you can do. And we, as HR folks, think about this pretty readily. We do interviews and focus groups. We are analyzing data, but we're asking questions like, what's motivating employees and how do they see themselves? What does a good experience look like? How do employees make decisions? And this is part of making that human perspective that will make those change initiatives more successful. With that is finding those key organizational partners for change success. Having a change sponsor or executive to back the change is really important because there could be politics at foot that you need to try to navigate. You also need stakeholders that are help you in this change process. Your stakeholders, who are they? Here's some questions you can ask to try to go through that. Something that, who is going to be impacted, but also who can influence this change or the outcome. And sometimes these people are not who you might think they are. I worked at an organization that had a personnel committee, and anytime I took an employee action, they almost acted as if they were a union and could cause me all sorts of extra work. It didn't change the outcome, but it just drug out a process. So what I learned is this person had a lot of influence in my world. So I learned to include him earlier in the process before there was ever a complaint, because if I educated him up front, he was more likely to work with me. So there are people in your organizations that have informal influence, and they're good to tap into to help you make sure you're thinking through processes. And if they are bought in, your change goes more successful. Another role that you play is that of the cheerleader. You're communicating that change. It's a really important process of this. And this is more than doing just a PowerPoint. It's identifying this information and building this strategic plan. There are lots of different things that need communicated. There is the vision, the reasons why, the details, the impact of it, and the progress. Who is going to give those information? All the things are why it's all an important piece of what needs to be communicated at each step. Who gives those messages? The executive sponsors. Some of the things that they really should be sharing are the visions, the reasons for the change, the milestones, obstacles, and how HR supports that. And they include the help them include their voice, help them make those sorts of mechanism for feedback. Those are the way that HR can sort of lean in to make sure that the change is heard through the right lens. You also have a manager supervisor piece in this. They're going to speak towards their group more. So what's the impact for each group? How it is going to impact them, what support will be needed, what concerns there are. And you can tailor that message and help coach and direct the manager through things that are more department specific. And finally, the project team will have a role to play in communications, the timing, the logistics, the schedule update, different mechanisms from that standpoint. And what is the way that you'll communicate? Anytime that you can have two-way communication, face-to-face communication, encouraging in those conversations are really an important impact. So the final step, and probably the area you spend the most time in, is really coaching people and encouraging this change to take place. You have to deal with three really things in this space. One is the reactions that people have. That's the emotional piece of it. Training, do they know how to do it? And keeping them engaged through this process so they don't get discouraged. Reactions, You have to identify competing commitments, anticipate there's going to be resistance, and just really look through that. My husband does this to me a lot. He's kind of a Mr. Fix-It, and we have an old house that's approaching 100 years old, and he'll look around and he'll say, I think I'm going to move this wall. And I'll be like, wait, what? What do you mean you're going to move a wall? And then he has a reaction to me because I hesitated. And through the years, we've sort of negotiated. And I'm like, you've been thinking about this for a really long time, and you've thought about it, and you've researched it, and you have really logical reasons. But the average person doesn't think about moving walls in people's houses. And so a lot of times leaders have this sort of same thing. You've been in meetings for a very long time on a topic, and you have been addressing it and thinking about it, and you have come to a conclusion. And so you put together a PowerPoint and you say, hey, organization, here's what we're going to do. And then employees have a reaction and you are surprised. And that's the same concept here, is because we have to help those employees through that reaction because they didn't have the same lead up to it that you are used to having. Thinking about training, we all know that people need trained, but where people miss it is they forget they need to really endorse the training and have to make sure that the training gets applied. And then people get new confidence in it. Otherwise, it doesn't really go anywhere that they need to. And HR's role is really looking at working with them in different ways, whether it's your sponsors, your managers, change ambassadors, your super users, is really knowing how to work with each of them on an individual basis. And knowing that you cannot be everything to all people and to support them. So as you work with them, you can tailor that and encourage the organization through that change.
Thank you very much, Jeannie, for your presentation. We're going to move on now. Up next is Stephanie Zavislin. Stephanie is the consultant for recruitment outsourcing with nonprofit HR. She serves as a key point of contact with clients and candidates. She is responsible for assisting with candidate and client requests and skillfully manages all details and logistics related to open job requisitions. Without further ado, I turn it over to you, Steph.
Great. Thank you so much, Nana Tokatha. Today I'm going to talk about the bedrock of culture, which is values. My name is Steph Zavislin. I am a search consultant with nonprofit HR. So today I'm going to share 3 things with you. I'm going to talk about organizational culture and what it is, and how the role of values in culture and how culture is based on organizational values. And then finally, I'm going to assert that nonprofits need values-based culture in order to thrive. So I'd like to draw your attention to the picture on the screen. This is the 1936 Olympic row team. Those of you who read Boys in the Boat or saw the movie, you will know this story. These kids had an uphill battle. They were poor working class kids from the University of Washington. They started out as inexperienced rowers. They made it all the way to the Olympic Games in Germany in 1936. And the race for the gold, the final race, was the hardest one that they had faced up to that point. They were rowing into the wind. They were in the least advantageous lane, most exposed to the wind. And on top of that, the crowd was deafening. They could not hear the coxswain, and the coxswain is this person with the megaphone up front. And so in desperation to keep the team together, the coxswain started hitting the side of the boat to keep rhythm. Row, row, row. And they couldn't hear him above the roar, but they locked eyes and followed his rhythm. And this team of young men won the gold medal. So nonprofits can sometimes be compared to these boys in the boats. They're inexperienced, they're passionate, and they are in need of good leadership. What this gold medal team had was a good leader and clear direction. And even when they couldn't hear his voice, they could follow his signal. So put that story in your back pocket. We will revisit it in a couple minutes. Today, I want to talk about culture, specifically nonprofit culture. Culture is at the forefront of conversations about organizations. Candidates ask about culture in the hiring process. They often leave because of culture, what they perceive to be toxic culture. Leaders take classes about culture. Consultants are hired to guide culture. What do we know about it? Well, we know that it drives productivity and profitability. There are endless studies about how culture and a strong, healthy, positive culture is directly tied to the bottom line. We know that leaders typically set and drive culture. We know that culture is top down, and employees are often taking cues and looking at leaders to know what is appropriate and what they're going to get punished and maybe even fired for. We know that culture is a significant factor of the employee experience. And it's a lot of times make or break if an employee stays at an organization. It's because of the culture. And we know what it isn't, right? We know that it's not a ping pong table or foosball table in the break room and free lunches every now and then. Culture goes a lot deeper than that, and it doesn't take a quick Band-Aid, a free lunch to fix it. So what is it? We've talked about what we know about it. Culture is the collective result of how people think and behave. It's the unwritten rule book of how we do things around here. I've heard it said that culture is how employees feel on Sunday night about going to work on Monday morning. So notice these definitions, they focus on behavior. What drives our behavior? Our behavior comes from our values. You hear organizations, not just nonprofits, but most organizations talk about the 3 pillars of mission, vision, and values. Mission is the why in the organization. It's why your organization exists in the first place. What are you trying to accomplish? What need are you trying to fill? Your vision is a state of the world that doesn't yet exist, excuse me, but if you fulfill your mission, the world will be different because you had existed. So we envision a world where children are no longer abused, or we envision a world where animals are no longer put in kill shelters. Name your cause. You are working towards something and creating a different state of the world. And then people get a little less clear on values. It's good to have them. But they are not meant to be words that make us attractive to people. They're not meant to be shiny. Values are actually your hardcore, uncompromising commitment to good behavior. The values say, how are we going to get there? What do we believe? And how are we going to accomplish our goal? In other words, how are we going to be in lockstep? How are we going to create and manage expectations of everyone who comes in contact with us? How are we going to stay on track? We looked at a few things we know about culture, so let's look at a few key points about values. The first is every organization has values. Every organization is operating according to some set of beliefs that dictate values that drive behavior. You cannot choose your values. They're not meant to be a list of nice words that you put on the wall or the website. Your values should reflect the behaviors that people are actually experiencing. And not all values are good, but values are always at play. Some values are guiding the organization, and some probably may not be serving the organization. When we get off course, if we get distracted or overwhelmed, values pull us back to what we are committed to and keep our organization at its best. And values help organizations define acceptable and unacceptable behavior. Values say, we are chasing this goal. Let's do it together. Let's do it well. Values are boundaries. People like knowing what is in and out of bounds. We don't do well as people with arbitrary or ambiguous. So values are those lines that we put around ourselves to know how we're going to operate well. Have you ever heard of bad behavior in the workplace? How about a bad behaving boss, someone who's rude, condescending, unproductive, or even just straight up explosive? What about having a bad boss in a nonprofit? This really surprises and disappoints people. People assume that nonprofits automatically are full of good people and good behavior. It's like we have these invisible, inevitable boundaries. They might think that we're selfless, that we are willing to earn a lower wage for the good of society. Maybe that we're innovative and we come up with resourceful, creative ideas for big world problems, or that we're scrappy, that we know how to make the most of limited resources. But are any of these expectations being discussed? Are any of these expectations actually being created? Are they healthy? And do we want these to be the expectations? What I see time and time again in nonprofit culture is anything goes. It's anything for the mission. You've got passion for the mission, but you've got no direction on how to accomplish it, no real parameters on how to behave. So the environment becomes a little bit of a free-for-all. There's no emphasis on behavior. There's no talk of what's acceptable and unacceptable. So going back to that picture of the rowers in the boat, imagine everyone rowing when they think it's appropriate to row. And the coxswain is saying, just row as hard as you can. This is like nonprofit culture without clear values. This is when and how culture often gets created. It's not intentional, it's haphazard. Nonprofits need these values, these healthy parameters. They need to say, this is not a free-for-all. This is an organization with a clear mission, an inspiring vision, and clear values that let us know what's okay and what isn't. Now we know what creates culture. It's our behavior. We know behavior is based on our values, and we want to create a healthy culture based on good, life-giving values. We want to put boundaries and create good expectations. And when it's all said and done, we have an organizational culture that reflects the values that we're committed to. These values guide decisions, programs, budgeting, and people operations. All of this is led by our leaders. Culture is, again, top-down. Employees are taking cues and looking at the leaders to know what's right. And we, as leaders, make sure that we're looking for these values in the everyday. So in summary, today we learned about culture and we know why it matters. We learned that values shape culture because culture is about behavior and expectations. And we learned that nonprofit mission can be more successfully achieved when it's led by clear values. Clear values in nonprofits eliminate the free-for-all, and they help us row together synchronously. So I want to take you back to that story of the Olympic row team. Imagine that row team is a nonprofit staff, and the coxswain is the executive director. The best way staff is going to get where they're going is if we row in unison. And that's how we're going to achieve our mission. We're looking at that executive director, and the outside is noisy. Maybe it's deafening. Priorities are competing. Deadlines are mounting. Funding is scarce. Economic factors are threatening. Staff is stressed. Imagine that leader exclaiming the values, guiding them with clarity, reiterating the life-giving values as the workers row in tandem. This is what it's like to follow a values-based leader. This leader knows our priorities, creates clear expectations, and the work is hard, but they all know what they can expect from each other and from ourselves. Eyes on the leader. This is culture. So now I'd like to know if you have any questions about values and culture in nonprofits.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I'd like to open it up for one quick question. We've got one more presenter before we conclude.
Quick question, Stephanie, an excellent presentation. I'm curious to know that when an organization is in transition and unsure of its values, how would you counsel them to resettle?
I would do a values discovery, Denisha. I would work with them and it starts with storytelling. And you ask, tell me in a time when the organization was at its best, and tell me, you got to find what's going on there and see what values are actually guiding the organization before you can commit to what values the organization wants to be led by. So I would start with the values discovery.
Thank you so much again, Stephanie, for your presentation. I'd like us to move on to our last presenter. Last but not least, we have Janelle Freeman, who is our Managing Director for Business and Client Services Operations. Janelle is a distinguished leader known for her ability to seamlessly navigate complex business infrastructures while maintaining a strategic perspective. In her role, Janelle ensures firm-wide alignment and oversees the implementation of strategic initiatives that focuses on client-focused solutions to achieve the firm's goals efficiently and effectively. Without further ado, I turn it over to you, Janelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is truly an honor to be here this afternoon with you all. As HR professionals, we spend so much of our time focused on optimizing others, helping them grow, supporting their journeys, and making sure the organization is running smoothly. But today, I want to turn the spotlight inward and talk about something that we sometimes overlook, ourselves. We're going to spend a little time talking about excellence begins with optimizing your personal operations and look at 6 tactics that we can get you all there with. Now, I'm sure many of you, like me, have had days where you're so caught up in helping others that you forget to take time for your own needs. We've all been there, right? But here's the thing. Excellence, true excellence, starts with us. It starts with how we manage our own lives, our own time, and our own energy. So let's dive into how we can optimize our personal operations, because if we're not at our best, how can we expect to bring out the best in others? Think about this for a moment. We're the ones who champion change, who advocate for development and growth within our organizations. But how often do we apply that same level of commitment to ourselves? How often do we check in with how we're operating on a personal level? Excellence isn't just something we strive for in our careers. It's a way of life, and it begins with the small, everyday choices we make. Whether it's how we manage our mornings, how we handle stress, or how we balance our personal and professional lives, those choices define the level of excellence we bring to the table. So let's make this practical. What are some tangible ways we can start optimizing our personal operations? The first step is self-leadership. This is a term we throw around a lot, but what does it really mean? For me, self-leadership is about owning your day, owning your habits, and your mindset. It's about making decisions with intention rather than just reacting to whatever comes your way. I've found that days I feel my most productive are the days that I start with a clear plan. Every morning, I take a few minutes to plan my day, not just in terms of work, but also how can I show up for my family and for myself? What are the 3 things I absolutely need to get done today? And more importantly, how do those things align with my personal values? And you want to know what the answer to those questions are? It starts with prioritizing you. This isn't just about being organized. It's about leading yourself with purpose. We lead others every day. Let's make sure we're leading ourselves with that same level of intention. Now let's talk about time management. We've all read the books, attended the workshops, and tried the apps, but let's be real. How many of us have tried time management systems and it lasted all of what, 2 days? I know. You probably have a few guilty smiles out there. But time management isn't just about squeezing more into our day. It's about making sure we're spending time on what truly matters. For me, time management really clicked when I stopped trying to cram more into my day and started focusing on doing less, but better. I'll be honest with you, there have been times when I've looked back at my week and realized that I spent so much time on all of these things and it didn't move the needle at all. And that's a tough pill to swallow for a type A personality like me. It was a wake-up call. One of the best strategies I've adopted is time blocking. I protect my most productive hours, and for me, that's the early morning around 4 a.m. Now, I know that's early, but for me, this is when I do my best thinking. It may not work for everyone, and you need to find what works for you. During this time, I set aside time for the deep work, whether that's strategic planning, creative thinking, tackling a project, or just being, sitting in silence. I've learned to also say no, or to at least delegate, because as it turns out, I'm not indispensable. A shock to my ego, I know, but great for my calendar. I realize that saying no to the things that don't align with my priorities allow me to say yes to the things that truly matter. But time management is only one side of the coin. The other side is energy management. You can have all the time in the world, but if you're running on empty, you're not going to be very effective. For me, energy management has been a game changer. It's about recognizing that we're not machines. We can't just go without being recharged. Whether it's getting enough sleep, staying active, or simply taking breaks during the day, these are the things that keep us performing at our best. I used to think that taking a break was a luxury. Silly me. I honestly did. Something I didn't have time for. But I've learned that stepping away for even just 10 minutes can make me more focused and productive. It's about working smarter, not harder, as our dear colleague Patty Hampton likes to say. When things go wrong, and believe me, they're going to go wrong, I try and ask myself, what can I learn from this? Sometimes the answer is profound. Other times it's maybe don't schedule 3 back-to-back meetings right after lunch. Of course, even with the best time and energy management, life throws curveballs. I'm sure you've all experienced those moments where everything seems to be falling apart and it's our job to keep it together, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. Whether it's dealing with organizational changes, difficult conversations, or supporting employees through tough times, we are often the steady hands in turbulent situations. But who steadies us? How do we build the mental resilience to not just survive, but thrive in these moments? One thing that's helped me is adopting a growth mindset. Instead of seeing challenges as roadblocks, I try to look at them as opportunities for learning and growing. And let's be real, sometimes that's easier said than done. But practicing self-compassion, being kind to ourselves, even in the words that we say to ourselves, when things don't go as planned, can make a world of difference. Let's switch gears and talk about learning. We live in a world that's constantly changing, and to stay on top, we have to keep growing. We have to keep doing the things. But continuous learning isn't just about gaining new skills, new certifications, or knowledge. It's about constantly refining how we operate. I try to carve out time each week for personal development. Sometimes it's reading a book. Sometimes it's listening to one of my favorite podcasts. Other times it's reflecting on what went wrong and what didn't, what went well and what didn't. The key is to keep learning, keep adapting, and to keep pushing ourselves to be better. Finally, work-life integration. As HR executives, we're often juggling so many responsibilities that it's easy to let our personal lives take a back seat. Don't do it. But here's the thing. If we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't take care of others. Work-life balance isn't about splitting your time evenly between work and home 50-50. When has that ever worked? It's about integrating them in a way that works for you. It's about being fully present wherever you are, whether or not you're in the office or you're with your family. It's about setting boundaries and knowing when to unplug. I found that when I'm intentional about balancing work and my personal life, I'm more energized, more focused, and more effective in both areas. So here's my challenge for you. Take a moment to reflect on how you're managing your personal operations. What's one small change you can make today that will have a big impact on your life? Maybe it's setting clearer boundaries, prioritizing your energy, or simply leading yourself with more intention. Remember, excellence isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Every step we take to optimize our personal operations not only benefits us, but also creates a ripple effect that can transform our teams, our organizations, and ultimately our world. Thank you for your time today. I wish you all the best as you continue your journey towards excellence, both personally and professionally. And remember, if all else fails, there's always coffee. Lots and lots of coffee.
Thanks, Janelle, for your presentation. Mic drop. Thank you all so very much. We've got time. I know we're just a little bit over. We've got time for one question for Janelle before we conclude.
What's one of your favorite podcasts, Janelle?
So I love this podcaster called Patrice Washington, Redefining Wealth. I love all things personal finance, holistic, body, mind, everything being in sync. She's a business coach. She's a mother, business owner, speaker. She just always has really good gems.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janelle. We are out of time today. I hope you all have a sense of accomplishment for being newly minted keynote presenters for nonprofit HR. We don't know when we're going to be called upon to present, but the best thing we can do is be ready for that opportunity when it occurs. Again, I want to thank you for participating in this first round of keynote presentations. You did it.